Jay Weidner. We're here every Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 on the West Coast, 9 to 10 on the East Coast. And we're repeated every morning from 6 to 7 in the West Coast in the morning and 9 to 10 on the East Coast. And let's see here. What other things do I have to tell you? Not much. I want to get straight to it. I'm really glad to have my guest on here. He's one of my favorite writers and researchers. His name is Peter Levenda. I'm going to let him more or less tell you about him. He has written some incredible books, and you never can trust Wikipedia, so I don't want to really use it as a source here. But I know, because I've read his books, actually all of them, twice actually, at least the ones that are attributed to him, Unholy Alliance, and his magnum opus, Sinister Forces, which I don't even know what to say. I read Sinister Forces in about 4 days, and then I had to take a vacation. And then I had to come back and reread it again because I couldn't quite believe what I was reading. Very, very important books, actually. So, Peter, how are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be here, Jay. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So let's just, because the audience, may not know who you are exactly. You got involved in. You were of course a person who was always interested in the occult, just like I have always been interested in the occult. And I think you then were looking at the Nazis and realized that they were also basically an occult group, right?
Basically, yes. I mean, I was researching what would become Sinister Forces. I began in the 1970s, and I was going to write a book about how religion and politics influence each other. That was what was interesting me at that time. And I thought the Nazis would just make a separate chapter because of some of the religious influences that mainstream historians write about. And that's when I went to the National Archives to do some research and found the treasure trove of the captured German records from World War II that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the Nazis were heavily involved in occult research and that occult ideas had influenced their ideology. And that became Unholy Alliance. That one chapter of Sinister Forces then became a book of its own. That's what interested me in that. And I went as far as interviewing Nazis, neo-Nazis, Klansmen, and I even went to South America to investigate a colony down there that I had heard about through historian Ladislav Sparago's book, Aftermath, which was a mysterious colony high up in the Andes Mountains that was run by a former Luftwaffe officer and medical officer, and it was supposed to be a safe house for Nazi war criminals, and it was also a religious center of some kind. So I went down to Chile in '79 and got myself detained by these people and eventually released, and that's sort of the bookend for Unholy Alliance. The first chapter and the last chapter deal with that horrifying experience.
Yeah, that was really terrifying in the book, I have to admit. And I go to South America a lot, Peru and Chile, to do research. And the whole entire spine of the Andes, actually, from southern Peru all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, is spotted with these towns high up in the Andes. There's not just one; there's several.
There are, especially down in the south, near the lakes region of Chile, near Valdivia.
Yes,
it's German towns with German street names, German newspapers. The whole 9 yards. It's a fascinating part of the world. And according to Miguel Serrano, who is the South American Nazi theologian, if you will, who just passed away about less than a year ago, as far as he was concerned, the Andes Mountains was the location of Shambhala. I mean, that was the Aryan homeland, the mystical Aryan homeland he believed was in the Andes Mountains, and he claimed that the colony I visited was one of the outposts, one of the sacred sites of this Aryan Shambhala.
Yeah. Have you aware of the French occultist Jean Robin and his work? It tells a strange story. He was one of the leading French occult researchers for years, actually. He's not very famous here, but because he's never been translated. But if you can read your French, he's really quite interesting. And he suddenly converted to Catholicism about 5 or maybe 8 years ago. And he finally wrote a book explaining why the denial of the occult and the conversion to Catholicism. And he tells this really hair-raising tale of being taken to an underground city in the Andes and shown things that were unbelievable. And whatever it was, it scared the living daylights out of him. And he came back to, I guess, his original programming, which was the Catholic Church. Right, or scurrying like like I don't know what. So, which I find quite fascinating, especially with your work and Joseph Farrell's work on what he's finding with the movements into Argentina, and things begin to make a lot of sense once you consider this and what they're really working on. Who knows, you know? I mean,
well, South America is a kind of blind spot for most North Americans, you know. It's all sort of looks the same down there, and people tend to lump everything together and call the whole place Mexico, you know. But it's been under the radar for so long, and so much has gone on down there. I mean, that was the destination of choice for Nazi war criminals escaping justice at Nuremberg. So the rat lines, extended all the way into Bolivia, Peru, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Brazil. I mean, there were just so many of these war criminals, people with very sophisticated educational backgrounds and a very high level of loyalty to the ideals of Nazism that wound up there and wound up having very influential roles in some of the governments that took place from the 1950s through the 1980s that we know of for sure. So there's a lot that's been going on in South America, and most of us are kind of oblivious, to it. We're distracted by the Middle East. We're distracted by sometimes events in Europe or even in Asia. But South America, for some reason, for so many of us, is just an unknown country.
Well, it is, and it's gonna bite us one day soon, I'm afraid. There's a lot going on down there. There was just a huge massacre in Peru. The Indians were protesting, the oil companies coming in, and the army just came in and it was as big as Tiananmen Square. Not one word in the American media about it at all.
Well, the funny thing is I'm based in South Florida right now after years of living abroad. And I had gone to Colonia Dignidad, in Chile. I had investigated this operation. And when they raided the colony a couple of years ago and they made these elaborate revelations of the horrors that were taking place at this colony, of the torture and interrogation that went on there, of political prisoners being killed, of Nazi war criminals coming through, of all sorts of horrendous medical experiments, all this stuff that sounds like it comes from a Robert Ludlum novel was actually happening, and yet there wasn't a peep in the South Florida newspapers, nothing in the Miami Herald, nothing in the Sun Sentinel, none of these major newspapers were covering this. And South Florida is heavily Latin, I mean, there are a lot of Latin people here. And, they listen to Univision, they listen to their Spanish radios and television stations, they read Spanish newspapers. None of the major media here was covering this striking story. None of the English media, the Spanish media, nobody was talking about the colony and how, bizarre it was. It seemed to me an excellent story for the news media. I mean, it had everything. It had sex and violence and religious cults and Nazis and, whatever you wanted was there. And nobody cared.